Dynasty Nerds on Better Sports Network.
Oh, man. Dynasty Nerds, Better Sports Network, the unstoppable, unbeatable, unbreakable duo that you get every single Wednesday night. Welcome back, guys. We are just 24 hours away. Not even 24 hours. We're like 22 hours and 45 minutes away from week 5 beginning. We just finished up week 4. Lots of different things to talk about. Okay, that's not for me. I'm reading stuff over here. It's not for me. It's not for me. Sedated Fork here. Josh is here. Ed says, and welcome. That's right. That's Rich's thing. I thought about it. I really did. I thought about doing that. But I decided to, I'm gonna let him have his thing. And I'm not gonna invade on his turf, but it does kind of feel right. It does kind of feel right. Yes, this is the Dynasty Nerd Show. All kinds of stuff to cover. About 2 months ago, I had a man named Tom Crist join us, and he is an expert when it comes to all things injury. So I thought it would be good to kind of talk about some of the different injuries that we saw happen this week, some of the different ones that have been sustained this season. How much worry do we have about different things like that? You know what? I did get a haircut, Josh, but it's been probably 2 episodes. Maybe it was only 1 episode. It might have been only 1 episode. But I appreciate you noticing. Look good, feel good, play good. It's the motto. Edward says, Rich has a lot of his things, talking too fast, interrupting, going off on tangents, making up words. Yeah, no G's. He doesn't put G's on the end of anything. So lots of things for Rich to do on his own there. But so I'm bringing Tom Crist back. He did an awesome segment with us a couple months back. I want to pick his brain about all things injuries. And even this is a little outside the box. I want to ask him about a guy that isn't injured yet and actually hasn't been injured at all at the NFL level, but might be a sneaky risk for injury. We'll get to that in a little bit here. And then Dennis Bennett, he approached me this morning with a pretty cool idea. So he wants to look at the dynasty fantasy football landscape in terms of like a stock exchange and how things are moving, how things are looking. So I'm excited to see what he means by that. We've got some players that we want to talk about on that front. So Tyler, Heavy T, are we good to go with Tom? I know we were having a couple issues with the screen. Are we good to go on him, bringing him in here, or still working on that? All right, we'll take a little bit of time. Let him get ready, because look, he's an injury guy, but apparently his computer's a little injured at the moment. It makes sense. Better Boss saying his teams are hurting as well, so he's ready to get some information on all things injury related. So a couple of things that I want to touch on at some point today. And obviously, if you're new to the show, the format kind of works like this. In the opening part, we talk with a guest for about 40 minutes or so. Then we have a half-hour period where we talk all things trades. And now, I don't know about your guys' leagues, but my leagues, the trade market's starting to heat up. I've made 2 or 3 trades in the past couple days, sent out a few other offers that may or may not have been accepted. But now's that time of year where the trades really start to get juicy all the way up until the trade deadline. So we can talk all kinds of things as far as trades go. Oh, my guys from Brazil, watching from Brazil. Now, I know certain parts of South America would be the same as the Eastern time zone, I believe. So I'm not sure what time it is for you there, but I'm guessing it's not too far off from us. But we'll see here. Just Josh says the injury bug is killing him. Yeah, I had a couple teams. Fortunately, the rest of my team went off, but I had a team where both Javonte and Mike Evans left the game early, and that really hurt. But fortunately, the rest of the team covered. Sedated Fork says, Tom, please confirm that there is no way that Aaron Rodgers is playing this season. Stop the insanity. Banzera, yeah, all over the world, man. Just 1 hour ahead. So you would be the same as like our central time zone. Okay. Or no, ahead, not behind. So you're 1 hour ahead. So it's 10 o'clock there for you? 10 o'clock p.m., I think. All right. But all kinds of things trade. So in that middle segment there, that's when we get to any trade. So you can go ahead and start putting them in the chat now. I won't get to them now. Although maybe depending on what's going on with Tom, maybe we'll mix it up. We'll mix up the time frame a little bit. But you can get any trades that you want to get in there, just general advice on your team, start sits, any of that kind of stuff. We can get that answered. And we usually do that between 9:45 and 10:15. But if we have them early today, I'm willing to get it done early. I'm willing to get it done early as well. But let's talk about how the fantasy landscape has looked so far, because there's been some interesting names that have been rising up the board certain places. One name that we haven't really even talked about it much on the Dynasty Nerds show just yet, but I do think it's an interesting one to talk about. And there's a player that for the past 4 weeks has 3 games of 18 points, 18.6, 18.3, and 18.5 at the wide receiver position that I don't feel like people are talking about. He's currently the wide receiver 16 on the season. Romeo Doubs. Look, we've been talking a lot about Nico Collins, and rightfully so. We've been talking a lot about Puka Nacua, and rightfully so. We've been talking a lot about different players that are rising up boards, but I feel like, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like I haven't heard a lot about Romeo Doubs. And it's a shame because, yes, I know some people are like, well, the first couple of weeks were a fluke. It was on 5 targets, and then it was on 3 targets. So he's not getting the ball a lot. Well, these past 2 games, 12 targets and 13 targets. So my thought here is, I wonder if what we assumed was going to be the wide receiver 1 for the Packers, which was going to be, oh, here's my guy, Tom Crist. What's up, my man?
Sorry about that. I don't know what was going on there. I could hear you the whole time.
Hey, it happens. I feel like there was a stretch there where every other week Dennis's computer didn't work. So it happens. We're used to it here. We just adapt and adjust and move on. So
Awesome.
absolutely. Well, thank you again for joining us. We had you on probably about 2 months ago or so.
It was before the season started. I know that.
Yeah, sometime preseason. We had you on, and I was talking to somebody the other day, and I was like, Tom did a fantastic job. It was a great segment. Definitely want to have him back on again. And I'm glad that you reached out. We've been talking a couple weeks now. I thought this was a good week because we've had a lot of interesting injuries. We've had some guys that we believe are going to be shorter term injuries. But I know that sometimes even those shorter term injuries can be a little more difficult to adjust for in fantasy and know who to start, who not to start. But I wanted to start off one that I sent you a message about. And it's a guy that's actually not injured at all yet. In fact, he's been playing fantastic. An upside rookie that I really, really like. His name is Michael Wilson, wide receiver for the Arizona Cardinals. Now, the reason I bring him up is part of the reason that nobody knew much about this kid going into the draft process is because he missed so much time over his career due to injuries. So, as someone that has a lot of Michael Wilson over all of his dynasty teams, and so far is rewarding me for it, should I be looking to sell high on this guy, or should I just let it ride based on what you saw in his medical history? Should I be concerned?
Yeah, so right off the bat, the things that we need to consider from the medical literature is risk factors for injury, and there's 2 that stand out. There's numerous, but there's 2 that stand out as the 2 biggest risk factors for injury, and it's age, which he's a rookie, so that is not a problem for him.
Right.
And it's prior injury. Now, when it comes to prior injury, that alone is a risk factor itself, but really we need to break that down a little bit. What were the prior injuries? So if we look at Wilson's history, he had a Jones fracture, which is a fracture like a foot fracture, that 2 days after being cleared, he fractured it again. So likely, and that was originally in 2020, and I think that the second injury was in 2021 or some short period of time there. With that, when you're coming back from that injury, that bone fracture, the bone is not 100% strength as it was prior to injury. Typically, if you're returning, I mean, if it's a year later, yeah, it probably is. But within a couple weeks or a couple days in his case, it was still not quite 100%. So that's where some of that increased likelihood of it fracturing again occurs, especially with it being 2 days later. Now, with that being a foot injury, sometimes that can alter things mechanically. That can be a problem down the road. But the fact that he was very, very young when that happened makes it a lot easier to fully regain range of motion, fully regain strength, all that stuff to prevent this from being an issue down the road. Also, with this type of fracture, it's going to take a substantial force for that to break again. Whereas hamstring injuries, calf injuries, ankle sprains, they are much more likely to still be a problem months or years later. Whereas a bone fracture this far out, like he's now, 2-3 years out from it, not a huge concern of mine, especially because he was so young. If he was 30 when this happened, there's a period of time where he's probably in a boot and not really moving that foot much. That could lead to some lingering stiffness that when you're older, hard to get back. But if you're 20 when it happens, not a concern of mine. The other issue he had was a collarbone fracture. Again, a bone fracture, gonna heal fine. That one's an upper body injury, no concern whatsoever. So yes, he's got some injuries on his list, but if you really break them down, none of them are going to have that much of an influence on future injuries as a major high ankle sprain or a major ankle surgery or something like that would have.
Well, that's good to know because you see all of this missed time and 5-game season and just all these shortened seasons year after year. You wonder is this guy just super injury prone or is it just unlucky? And so it sounds like it was more just he was unlucky while he was in college. Is that right?
That's how I'm seeing it. And he's, like you said, he's playing really well. It doesn't appear to be bothering him at this point. Of course, any player can get injured, but his specific injuries are not ones that would lead me to think that he's at increased risk compared to other injuries that he could have had.
Awesome. Well, that makes me feel good because he was one of my late round darlings. But that was always the one thing in the back of my mind where I was like, if he performs well, which I think he could, do I sell right away for a profit? And now it looks like I can wait back a little bit and see if he can really develop into a top 24 type receiver. So excited to see how that all plays out. All right, let's get into the guys that have actually been dealing with injuries. And even the first one that I want to talk about, we're still unclear if there was really an injury here or not. But Jonathan Taylor, he's off the pup now. I remember talking about him with you in the offseason, and you were kind of worried about that ankle. But right away, it sounds like he was a full go in practice. Now, they reported it that way. He didn't actually – they don't have like a full workload until Thursday. But that being said, sounds like things were pretty good to go for him there. Should we be worried at all about this ankle, or does it really seem like this was just more of a contract thing?
Here's how I'm looking at it. I do think it could be a problem. So if we remember when we talked before, he didn't injure this ankle once. He didn't injure this ankle twice. He injured it 3 times last season, re-aggravations each time, like the same high ankle sprain over and over again. And then in January, he had surgery, which these days, when we hear high ankle sprain and surgery, we associate it with the tightrope procedure like Cooper Kupp had. Super successful procedure. That's not what Taylor had. Now, obviously, I was the surgeon. The surgeon made what they believe was the right call, and I'm absolutely not questioning that. but with the procedure they did was a debridement or a clean out. So basically there's little frayed bits of ligament or tissue or whatever, and they just kind of clean that out. It's not actually repairing anything. Now, they probably didn't do the tightrope because it wasn't injured to the degree where it would need that. So like I said, again, the surgeon probably made the best call in the moment. But with high ankle sprains, they have a tendency to linger. They have a tendency to not fully heal, especially if there's been 3 of them in one season. And the fact that he did start on IR makes me think that it's not just a contract thing. There probably was some issue there. Now, a whole nother month to rehab, to rest, to rehab. He totally could be ready to go. He very much could. I'm going to be closely monitoring practice videos, practice reports this week. The things that I'm really looking for with the high ankle sprain is his ability to change direction, more so than straight line sprint speed. So as fans, we love to go crazy when we see a player just running on the field unopposed, no defenders. What we really need to be looking for is his agility, his cut on a dime, his ability to change direction off that ankle. That's the problem with high ankle sprains. It makes it hard to plant and cut. So with his situation, I absolutely think he can play well. Absolutely. But 3 high ankle sprains is definitely one of those injuries that could be a risk factor for future injury. And not even just high ankle sprain. A lot of times what happens when there's recurring ankle injuries is they lose range of motion and they don't fully regain it. And our ankles are our shock absorbers. So if they're not able to fully move, they're not able to fully accept the weight from the ground when we run or cut. So now or the force from the ground when we run or cut. So now there's more force through the knee, the hip, the back, etc. So of course, I'm hoping that everything goes well for him as a physical therapist. My job is to literally help people get back to what they're doing. So I really hope that he can be successful, but there still are some flags here, in my opinion.
Yeah, we're talking to Tom Crist at Fantasy Injury T. All right, we heard about Kenny Pickett this week. And originally, I heard things about an MCL, ACL. I heard all kinds of stuff. And then it kind of came out that it seems like it's probably just a bone bruise. How should we be evaluating Kenny Pickett? Do you think there's any concern that it was anything more? Or should we really just say like it's a bone bruise? And can you clarify exactly what a bone bruise is? Because we see bruises, on our legs and stuff like that. But is that exactly what they mean, or is this something like a deeper tissue injury?
Well, this is the same injury Travis Kelce had. And of course, when we saw all the reports on Kelce, we were super concerned about ligament injuries and all that stuff. Same exact injury, knee bone bruise. So what happens is when there's enough of an impact on a bone, it can create little itty bitty micro bleeding, but not to the degree of a fracture. That's where the difference is. And really, all it is a matter of getting that bleeding to go away and getting the pain to go away. When it's the knee is very prone to swelling up like a balloon, which will then impact range of motion, which will then impact anything athletic. So his ability to play is about getting the swelling down, getting the pain down, getting the range of motion back. And sometimes it takes a couple days, but we saw with Travis Kelce, I mean, his injury was a Tuesday and they played Thursday. So 2 days is usually not going to be enough. That's why he wasn't able to go. Pickett with a whole week, it's not out of the question for him to be able to play. I think they are considering the fact that they have a bye the next week. So do we want to rush him back, or do we want to give him? And I mean, Trubisky's, in my opinion, pretty parallel to Pickett as far as helping them win. But it's not out of the question for him to play. And if he does play, I don't think this would really hinder him too much. He may be a little slower, but from a throwing standpoint, I think he should be fine.
Awesome. Well, that's good to know on him. If he does play, should we expect maybe a little bit more limited mobility then?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. All right. I got to get to one of my favorite players in the league. And when I saw this happen, I caught my breath. I was like, oh no. But it sounds like it wasn't as big of a deal as I originally thought. So Javonte Williams, I saw him playing in the first quarter and had a run to the outside and then just kind of slowly fell down. You saw him like decelerate, kind of it looked like he winced a little bit, and I was like, oh no, did he tear something? Like, are we going to be missing more extended time for Javonte? But it's been reported that it's a hip flexor. How much of a concern is this as far as like a re-injury occurrence? Does this have anything to do with his knee injury from before? Break this one down for us.
Hard to say with certainty if this is related to the knee injury, but it very well could be just compensating for a not fully strong knee at this point. Basically, the hip flexors, it's a group of muscles that start in the hip and pull your thigh forward. So we think like the forward motion of walking or sprinting. They'll do that. But as far as athletics go, it's painful, but it doesn't necessarily inhibit function as much as we would think. For a soccer player, this is a bad injury because that kicking motion is going to be really impacted. I have a teenager right now on my caseload who has this injury and he can't play soccer right now. He'll be fine, but for right now, he can't play. As far as Javonte goes, his sounds so mild, but this week, we'll see if he can go. He could certainly impact his speed a little bit. I would think more so speed rather than agility, like straight line sprinting speed. But again, not as much as if it was like a calf injury or something like that. The concern would be, and I'm not trying to raise any alarms because this is not something I've heard. I just want to explain the anatomy here, is one of the hip flexor muscles. It's called the rectus femoris. It's part of the quad muscles, actually. It attaches, part of its attachment is up into the hip labrum. So oftentimes when that muscle is injured, there'll be a little bit or even a big labrum tear. I think we would have heard that if that was the case. It's not out of the question that he has a small one, but athletes can play with small labral tears, no problem. I think we would know if there's a big one, but that's something to just be looking out for. If this is the kind of injury that ends up getting worse as he plays through it, that's something that could get worse, would be a labrum issue.
So we just had a question from Bezerra, who's actually told us from before. He's actually from Brazil, but he had a question about Dobbins and Rodgers. He said that he heard that there's potentially Rodgers is thinking about being able to come back this year with, the exploratory surgery and different things like that. Is there any chance that Dobbins could also come back, or is it more simply because it's a quarterback position versus a running back position? What chance is there that we see even Rodgers, let alone Dobbins?
Yeah, what a storyline when that came out about. So the new type of surgery, they use the word internal brace. Now, Garrett, here's a quiz for you.
Okay.
When did we hear internal brace recently? With what player?
Ooh, internal brace. I don't know.
Who's another player injured in the playoffs last year who had a bad injury that we thought would be out for a whole year, but then he came back and played week 1?
Injury in the playoffs. Thought he would be gone the whole year. Came back and played week 1. Was it Pollard?
No, Brock Purdy.
Oh, Brock. Okay.
UCL. So they did a UCL repair with an internal brace. So this is a similar idea as far as what I've read about it. But the difference is the UCL is a ligament, the Achilles tendon is a tendon. So, and not only is it a tendon, but it's the strongest tendon in the body that has to be able to withstand up to 10 times your body's weight and force. So for a 200-pound person, it needs to be able to withstand 2,000 pounds of force. The UCL it needs to take on a lot of force too with the throwing motion, but not quite the same degree. And we saw it took Brock Purdy 5 months to start throwing again after the UCL with the internal brace. I would think that an Achilles with an internal brace would take longer than that, simply because it's weight bearing and it needs to take on so much force. So to answer your question, Aaron Rodgers, with it being his left leg, that is huge because he's a right-handed quarterback, creates his power by pushing off his right leg. If this was his right Achilles, I don't think this would be a conversation. The fact that it's his left still would be remarkable if he can play in the playoffs, which first off, Zach Wilson would have to get them there. But it's not so crazy to me. It's
Okay.
crazy. Don't get me wrong. It's crazy, but it's not impossible is how I'm seeing it. And it is very new. So it's hard to make any comparisons because we don't really have any.
Sure.
J.K. Dobbins on the other side, on the other hand, I think it's just too much force for a running back to return in that short of a period of time. But for next season, I mean, it's still going to be an uphill battle for Dobbins to be effective next season, but he's got the time. He's got a whole year to rehab, and he's young, very, very high athletic profile, and by all accounts, seems very motivated. So I'm not ready to completely rule J.K. Dobbins out for next year, but I think it'll be very hard for him to be productive next year. I don't think we're going to see him this year at all, though.
Yeah, no, makes sense. Couple other smaller ones that I did want to get to and talk about real quick. Justin Herbert, broken middle finger, non-throwing hand. He finished the game with this injury. We're not too worried, right?
No. If it was his throwing hand, we'd be worried, but it's not. He's got the bye this week too. I imagine that they'll have that sucker taped up or splinted or both. The only concerns are, can he take a snap, which they'll probably just go shotgun predominantly, and defenders are going to be swatting at that thing. So will he be able to not fumble with contact? But throwing, not a concern at all.
We've had two big time running backs that fantasy managers are missing sorely, I'm sure. I know I am in a couple teams where one of the teams actually have both of these guys, Austin Eckler and Saquon Barkley. Both have missed a decent amount of time. Any news on either one of these guys once they're back? Is it the kind of thing where just plug them right in, or would you even have some concerns once they get back?
So both high ankle sprains. In order to answer that question, we got to dive into what is a high ankle sprain. So with our ankle, we have two shin bones, tibia and the fibula. They run parallel to each other. They're connected by really, really strong connective tissues. With a high ankle sprain, these bones get separated from each other, and that connective tissue gets injured. The severity is going to determine like how far away they get separated from each other and how much injury to that connective tissue occurs. And that's important because when those bones get separated, that ankle is not as stable anymore. So now it has a harder time forcefully pushing off. So just like we talked about with Jonathan Taylor, how I'm interested in the videos of can he change direction powerfully? That's what is often lost with this type of injury. And depending on the severity, if it's not that severe, you can get that power back, no problem. Mm-hmm. And Barkley's didn't sound major or super severe. The fact that he was pushing to play just 10 or 11 days after the injury. Eckler's hard to know if it was more severe or if they were just being more conservative with him. But either way, it certainly could impact their ability to push and change direction, push off that foot and change direction. So we may see a little bit less efficient running, but these guys are so elite and from a fantasy standpoint can score you points in so many different ways that even if they're not at 100%, they're still going to be better than like Samaje Perine or whoever else you would be putting in. So when they play, you start them. You may just see a little bit of a hit on their production from what you're used to.
Now, can you break down the difference between an ankle sprain and a high ankle sprain? Because I feel like you almost only ever hear about high ankle sprains, but the fact that they're differentiating between a non-high ankle and a high ankle, like what is the difference?
It's the tissues that are injured. So like I said, with the high ankle sprain, it's the tissue that connects the tibia and the fibula. There's two bones, and then there's some smaller ligaments that kind of wrap around them together. That's what's injured. And then you have that separation of the bones leading to less stability in the ankle. With a traditional ankle sprain or lateral ankle sprain, it's different ligaments that are injured. There's 3 ligaments on the outside of the ankle that attach the leg bones to the foot bones, and those get injured when the foot rolls inward big time, which is super easy to see on video. And that can certainly be a problem. It can be painful. It can make it harder to run and push off of, but it's not going to be quite as much of a loss of stability, and it's easier to tape and brace to recreate that stability, and generally they heal a lot faster than a high ankle sprain.
That makes sense. Today to Fork asked, any worry of the artificial turf at MetLife for Saquon? And let's just touch on that in general, because I know that's been a really big talking point for NFLPA and different groups like that, of the artificial turf versus just, normal field turf. Is that something that you think is legitimate, or is that just something where the players prefer non-turf fields and they're just trying to push that narrative?
So I think there is some legitimacy to it. So for one, underneath turf is like rubber or something that is not going to move, where underneath grass is mud or dirt, which has the capacity to move. So as far as cleats getting stuck, it's logical to say that it's less likely for a cleat to get stuck with dirt or mud that could slide out from under it. If you look at some of the research, so the NFL put out a statement, I can't remember exactly when, saying that there's no difference in the injury rates. And then I want to say it was several months later, the NFLPA responded by saying that the NFL cherry-picked those numbers from, I think it was the 2021 season only, whereas the data from several years before did show that there's higher injury rates on turf. So if we go off of that, there is some evidence that turf has higher injury rates. If we go off what the subjective reports of the players, it certainly sounds like they feel less safe on turf. And just thinking logically, well, dirt and mud can slide, whereas rubber can't.
Right.
I think there's more research that needs to be done. I'm not here to make any conclusions on that, but I think the players have some evidence behind what they're saying.
Yeah, I think it is a really interesting conversation. And there is even just the fact of when it's in your head, if you feel like it's more dangerous, sometimes you might play more tentatively. And because you're playing more tentatively, you open yourself up to more opportunities to get hurt. Like I wonder how much of it is true versus placebo. Like, I don't know. It's a really interesting conversation though. Couple of other guys. I know it's not as big of injuries, but I do think it's interesting to talk about. Two guys specifically that we heard about a hamstring injury this week. Pat Freiermuth, which it was reported that it was looking like 2 to 3 weeks for him. And then Mike Evans, which I haven't seen a timetable for Mike Evans, but obviously he's one of the older players in the league at this point. What's your worry for these guys? And are hamstrings something that can crop up and become a season long issue?
Oh yeah, I think we've seen that numerous times. Here's the thing about hamstrings. Obviously, they have massively powerful muscle for athletics, sprinting, acceleration, jumping, etc. If you look at the research on the like load through a hamstring, if you will, it dramatically spikes when an athlete goes from 80 to 100% of their top sprint speed. So, and then if we think about it, it takes a good 30, 40 yards to get to that speed. So what is the only offensive position group that routinely runs 30 to 40 yards? It's wide receivers. That's why this affects them and defensive backs the most, because they're running far enough to get up to that peak speed where a hamstring is maximally stressed. So Mike Evans, deep threat wide receiver, running down the field a lot. He's 30 years old now. Not out of the question for this to be a problem for him. But then on the other side, he's got the bye this week. Perfectly timed.
Yep.
They don't seem to think that this is that severe of one. So with like a mild hamstring, 2 weeks, it could be fairly well rehabbed. Probably not 100%, but fairly well rehabbed. And this is a guy who's dealt with so many minor soft tissue injuries in his career that have really not held him out of games too much or his production too much. Now, at age 30, perhaps this is when that could change. I'm not rooting for that. But just to give everyone as much information as possible, he does fit the profile of someone that would be affected by this more than other positions based off his position, the type of receiver he is running down the field, and his age. I'm not saying go get rid of him. He's an elite player, even still at 30, he's putting up awesome numbers. I just think it's something we need to be a little cautious about. As far as some of the data, in the first game back from a hamstring injury, receivers average a dip of 11% of their fantasy points and 16% in snap rate. For Mike Evans, that's not a tremendous amount. He's still, if he scores 11% points less than what he's averaging, that's still a pretty productive day.
Right.
But the re-injury risk is definitely there. As far as Freiermuth goes, we don't see any impact on fantasy production in tight ends when they return, like zero hit on their production. And that makes sense because they don't run as far as receivers. They obviously run routes, but they're typically much shorter. So they're not getting up to that peak speed where they would be stressing the hamstring. Now, his injury looks a little bit more severe. Like you said, 2 to 3 weeks. They do have the week 6 bye. So he'll probably miss this week. He'll get the bye week. And then we'll see if he's good to go week 7 or not. If he is, not really expecting it to hinder his production too much.
Yeah, no, that's good to hear, because the tight end landscape this year has been brutal. So we can't really afford too many tight ends not being out there, not being able to play. Well, Tom, are there any other injuries right now that you kind of have on your radar that you're like, I maybe this one's a big deal, maybe not, but it's at least something that we should be keeping an eye on, that we should be monitoring?
Well, the big one is Cooper Kupp, who's obviously starting to practice again. I was very interested with some of the reports that came out over the last couple days. So he's obviously been out for 4 weeks with the second hamstring injury of the season, 30 years old. We don't like to hear 2 hamstrings in one season for a 30-year-old. But I thought it was very interesting because I saw a report that they said it wasn't ever as severe as they originally thought. But then I saw another report, or maybe it was even the same report, saying that they want him at 80 to 90%, and he's not there yet. That raised an eyebrow for me because, one, 80% is not the threshold I want my athletes to return to sport. I want 90 to 95%. Is there a perfect way to know what percentage they're at? No, but there is some quantitative testing we can do: range of motion, strength, power output, single leg stability. There's a variety of tests that we can do to get an idea what percentage they're at, and we compare those tests to the other leg for like strength and stuff like that. So if he's not even at 80% yet and he's had 4 weeks, I'm a little concerned there, but I also just don't know how reliable that report was, because then McVay today was saying that he's gonna be practicing, and I think they listed him as limited, but McVay said that he was going to practice in full. So this is just an eerie situation here, and these next couple days are going to tell us a lot. So like how I said with the high ankle sprain running backs, I'm interested in their lateral motion. I'm really interested in seeing videos of Cooper Kupp running at 100% speed. If I'm not seeing that, and if I'm not hearing that he's practicing at 100% speed, I'm a little concerned. But then again, this is like the best player ever. So if he plays, you're obviously going to start him. But the expectations, I think, need to be tempered a little. I do think they're going to ease him back in. I don't think he's going to see 100% snap share right away. I think it's going to be gradual over the next couple weeks. Just interesting, like reading between the lines of some of those reports there was really interesting. And I look forward to seeing what they put out over the next couple days.
Well, and there was a report that he was going then to see a specialist right after his second one. Did that raise any flags for you? Because I thought that was, if it's just a hamstring, like a lot of times guys with just hamstring injuries aren't flying across the country to go see a specialist.
Right. So then right when that report was coming out, McVay was saying it's more of a nerve thing. That's actually one of my specialties in PT is something called neurodynamics, or it's basically when I raise my arm or move my leg, the nerves, they need to be able to slide a little bit too. It's not a tremendous amount of motion, but it's like a couple inches of motion of the nerve. What we see sometimes, a lot of times actually, and I think this is highly missed in athletics, is sometimes the nerves in the legs, the sciatic nerve is the big one, and then it branches into various other nerves. If that's not moving well, it runs the risk of tearing. If you swing your leg, like when you're sprinting, when your leg goes way forward, if that sciatic nerve is not moving well, it runs the risk of tearing. The body knows this. It subconsciously knows this, and it will not let that happen. So it will sacrifice the hamstring over and over and over and over again to prevent that nerve from tearing. So that I believe that is what McVay was talking about with the nerve thing, and I wonder if that's what he flew to Minnesota to see the specialist about. Again, that's something I'm highly trained in that. I do this nerve stuff all day long with people. It's very commonly missed because it really takes a lot of training to understand. Like I was fortunate that I sought out continuing courses on this nerve stuff that a lot of people don't. So I believe it's highly missed, especially in these players that have recurring hamstring injuries.
Well, and that's something that Darren Waller was talking about as well a few weeks back, correct?
Exactly.
Yeah. Interesting. So you said, so say this again, because I want to make sure I'm understanding it. So the nerve does not want to tear, so it's going to sacrifice the other ligaments in order to make sure that it doesn't.
So when your leg comes forward, the nerve needs to glide downwards. When your leg comes forward, if it's like if your knee's straight, like when you're running, the hamstring is getting stretched there. So the body, the subconscious body, I don't know if it comes from the brainstem or the spinal cord, somewhere it's a reflex that our body subconsciously knows when a nerve is getting tension beyond its capacity. And since the hamstring's job is to bend the knee and kick the hip backwards, the opposite motions that stretch the sciatic nerve, that's the muscle that is able to prevent overstretching by aggressively contracting, often to the point where it tears.
Interesting. Huh. The human body's crazy. All right.
Yeah. Just a little side note. The guy who taught me that stuff, his name is Jack Stagg. He's an absolute legend. I had him on my show about a year ago to talk exactly that stuff. It's an entire 25 or 30-minute episode on the Fantasy Injury Team podcast from sometime in October last year, and he explains it better than I do. So if anyone's listening wants to check that out, he's the kind of guy you could listen to him talk all day long. He's so entertaining.
Yeah. That's fascinating. Yeah, I'll have to check that out. Any other ones that we need to keep an eye on before we get you out of here?
T. Higgins would be the last one. Rib fracture. He said it's only one rib, which is better than more than one, obviously.
Sure.
When it comes to rib fractures, it as long as the fracture is not in a location that it can penetrate the lungs, causing a collapsed lung, it really is a pain tolerance thing. It hurts a lot, though. It hurts a whole lot. Because you think about it, even just breathing, our ribs have to expand and recoil, expand and recoil. When we're running, we breathe a lot more frequently. So that's
right.
Even just running is going to hurt. There's several major muscles that attach on the ribs, the pecs, the lats, the obliques. Those are all getting stretched and contracting with various aspects of playing football. So they're going to pull potentially on that fracture site, which wouldn't feel good. And then, of course, getting hit. That doesn't feel good either. So while this truly is a pain tolerance thing, I feel like it's going to be really hard for him to play this week. And if he does, it's probably going to be on a limited snap count. And there's always the risk that he gets hit the wrong way that knocks him out for the rest of the game. So, of course, he's great, but these Bengals are struggling anyway. If you have alternative options, even if Higgins does play this week, I think you need to consider the other options.
Yeah, Office Depot, real quick. He asked about Amon-Ra, and I didn't have him on my list because that just kind of cropped up today. Have you heard anything about the Amon-Ra situation and any feelings on that?
Yeah, this is another one that we're going to just have to look out throughout the week for reports. It's an abdominal injury. That can really go one of two ways, most commonly. There's other ways, but in football, at least, there's two really different. I'm simplifying this too much, but
Sure.
There's two types of abdominal injuries. There's one that's the sports hernia, which is a tearing of the tendons that attach the abdominal muscles to the pubic bone. That's not good. Let's hope that's not what he's dealing with, because that does not respond well to conservative care. Usually they'll rehab for a couple weeks, go and play, and immediately get injured again and then need surgery. Let's hope that's not the case with him. And then there's oblique injuries that we heard with Puka earlier this year, Jalen Waddle this year. Those usually are not bad. They can, maybe they'll miss a game or two, but when they return, they're just fine.
Sure.
So I saw Amon-Ra didn't practice, but he was seen sprinting, not just jogging, but sprinting on the sidelines. I would say that's a really good sign, but that's one that we'll keep monitoring, and I'll be tweeting about him throughout the week.
Perfect. Tom, we kept you on a little extra long, but really appreciate having you on here. Remind the good folks again where they can find you, where a lot of your work is at, what you're working on, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, my personal Twitter at Fantasy Injury T. I'm the founder of the Fantasy Injury Team, which our Twitter is injury_fantasy. You can find us on fantasyinjuryteam.com. I just like an hour ago put out my week 5 injury report. And then the Fantasy Injury Team podcast on all platforms, as well as YouTube, and Instagram is Fantasy Injury Team as well.
Awesome, Tom. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We will definitely get you on again this season when some more injuries crop up.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me.
All right, we'll see you, man.
See ya.
All right, well, with that, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we will get to all sorts of, I already see some of the trade questions, the start sit. Get them in now. Get all those questions in now. I'll start at the bottom. I'll work my way up through the comments, make sure we can get to as many of those as we can, and we'll do that when we come back.
What can we expect from you out there on the track tonight?
Listen, I have a wife, 2 kids. I have, full-time jobs. I'm never nervous. I don't even know what that word means. Can you explain what nervous means? No. I'm ready to have fun. I've never done anything like this before. I got asked to be a part of this. This is fascinating. Like, it's so cool to just look around and see what goes on here. So I'm just excited to get out on the horse. And you want trash talk? Is that what you're asking me for? No trash talk. I hope everyone does well.
All right. Everyone's going to do well, but it has to be a winner. So give me your trifecta. Who's going to come in first, second, and third? Your heat.
I will go Maria 1, me 2, Willie 3, Moose goes 4th.
Well, it's very simple. I won this event last year. I won my heat, and so the defending champ has to be the favorite. Now, that makes me a little nervous just because I feel like it's hard to repeat. There's a little pressure when you're the favorite, but that being said, I'm still optimistic.
So your heat, it's you,
yes.
Moose and Keith from Better Sports Network, and Willie Colon.
I think Keith might be my stiffest competition, and I asked for this because I actually recruited Keith, if you didn't know. So Keith, if you win, you're welcome.
Malusis is very good. I mean, he knows what he's doing, but I'm going to go with Maria.
Keith is waving to the crowd. He must pay attention because they're off. It's Mark Malusis going for the lead. Maria Marino on the outside, and now Keith Irizarry on the outside with speed, and they're 3 wide into the first turn. Woo! Mark Malusis is locked in for his life. 138 and 2. They're into the stretch. Sportscasters Derby 2. And still in front, Keith Irizarry. And now Mark Malusis is trying to squeeze on through.
Come on! Back! Come on! Let's go! Come on, dig it! Yeah!
Keith Irizarry. Keith, you did it all the way, wire to wire, over Mark Malusis.
Awesome! That was so cool!
The champ is here! Keith, what was it like being out there? Adrenaline rush, you were doing the Instagram Live, so there was no panic. You looked cool, calm, collected the whole time, and you won it.
I felt really comfortable. I did. Like, I know you were joking with me before. Are you nervous? Are you whatever? What are you? David, the driver, was awesome. He's like, we're going to win this. I said, all right, let's win this. And he said, let's go. Yeah, I just felt really comfortable. I did. It was fun. We're in the lead. I got Maria Marino on the right side of me, and I'm like, oh my gosh, she's going to beat us, right? And then out of nowhere, you see Moose coming up this way, and we feel him breathing down our neck. And I'm like,
Moose
no!
on the loose. Watch out.
Moose was definitely on the loose, and we just got Moose by a neck, a nose, whatever you want to call it. Yeah, but again, all of this for a great cause, and it was absolutely awesome to do this. It was cool.
All right, Keith, congratulations. And no matter what, you could always hold this over Moose's head.
All right. No music. We don't need music. We don't need it. It's overrated. All right, guys. Welcome back. Dynasty Nerd Show here on the Better Sports Network. Do want to remind you guys about the Fantasy Alarm All Pro subscription. That's right. The All Pro. This isn't just the basic. This isn't just like the all rookie team. No, this is the All Pro subscription. You can get a 7-day free trial of Fantasy Alarm's All Pro subscription. You can do that by going to fantasyalarm.com. That's fantasyalarm.com. You can try it out, see if you like it. If you don't, it was free. If you do, it was free. Even better. All right. So make sure you guys go check that out. Fantasyalarm.com. All right. Let me scroll down here. Make sure I don't want to miss any trade questions, start sits, anything like that. Let's see. All right. Here's the first one, I believe. If I miss one, let me know. Tanner Wilson asks, would you trade Nico Collins, Jamison Williams, and Jake Ferguson for CeeDee Lamb? I'm a rebuild team, 1 QB, non-tight end premium. Also have Dotson, Waddle, and Olave on my team. I really like Nico Collins a lot. We talked about him a couple weeks ago on here, and that's already looking like an underpay, where Rich Dotson and I were talking about I would give a late first. I would give a late 24 first to get Nico Collins on my team. So really like Nico a lot. Jamison Williams has a very high ceiling, but it's not very often that you are able to get a receiver of CeeDee Lamb's caliber, especially for a bunch of guys that, as much as I like a lot of those players, have not proven it over a consistent period of time. So I would do that to get CeeDee Lamb. I think he's that much of a difference maker. And now if you have him and Waddle and Olave starting each and every week, and then, Jahan Dotson in the flex, you're looking pretty solid there. That's a really good beginning core of a rebuild team. So well done. I would do that to get CeeDee Lamb on my squad. All right, Nathan Park says, what would you do with my team? 0.5 PPR, 8-team, 3 wide receiver, 2 running backs, 2 flex. I have Mahomes, Kelsey, Brees, Monty, Devontae, Ayuk, McLaurin, Saquon, James Cook, Shaheed Hunt, Godwin, Deshaun Watson, and Jacoby Myers. You do get return yards in this league. Okay. So in an 8-team league, it sounds like it's still 1 quarterback, 2 running back, 3 wide receiver, 2 flex. So you've got Kelsey at tight end. I'm assuming, unless it's simply just flex. So let me know if it's not just flex, because I know there are some leagues that are switching out their tight end position for another flex option. But assuming that, you've got the top tight end and the top quarterback. Brees and Montgomery to go along with McLaurin and James Cook. That's a really good running back core overall, but it's an 8-team league where the worry comes in is potentially the wide receiver core. I don't know in an 8-team league that there's great depth here. Obviously, Devontae, Ayuk, and McLaurin, even in an 8-team league, that's very solid starting wide receivers. But it sounds like Chris Godwin is your only true depth. Jacoby and Shaheed, you could start at any point. But I think this is a team that could probably be competing for a title when you have, some elite players like Mahomes and Kelsey. You're always in it. But I'd be curious to hear what your record is, because right now I think this is a team that I'm pushing for a ship. I'm pushing to see if I can win it all, because I do think you probably have enough there. Fantasy Football Addict saying good evening. What's up, my man? And then somebody else earlier, Valvez BTW said, what's up? How's it going? Hopefully you guys are still in here watching and get a chance to say hi earlier. I apologize. Didn't want to cut off Tom. It was too good of content. Didn't want to cut him off. Sedated Fork says, I have a ridiculous bye week problem. Super flex, and I can't start a single quarterback. I also have the flex position that I have to start Justice Hill. Seems impossible to compete. Take the L ? Wow. That's tough. I'm always willing to throw out there and see, is there a team like Mitch Trubisky is a perfect example. Can I give 2/3 to get Mitchell Trubisky so I can at least have a starting quarterback? Because on a contending team, each win matters. It could be the difference between not having a bye week and having a bye week. So if I can give 2/3 to at least get myself a starter this week, I would do that. Maybe you could give a late second and get Desmond Ridder. I would see is there somebody that is just probably a bye week fill-in type of player, or a guy's injured or something. But I would do that to try to make sure that I'm not just automatically taking the L. Now, I'm not overpaying. I'm not going out there and just, throwing a bunch of stupid picks at a position and then I don't need them the rest of the year. But I would just kind of peruse other teams and see if there is a 1 week, 2 week fill-in type of guy that I can get on the cheap. Brad McCoy says, should I trade Nakua for Mike Evans? That feels like a true rebuild versus contender question. Now, you can make the argument that Puka Nakua is good in either situation, but I am worried about Cooper Kupp coming back. And I talked about it on the Dynasty Nerds podcast last night. As long as he's in the situation without Cooper Kupp and with Matthew Stafford and Sean McVay, nothing to worry about. He's going to be at the worst a wide receiver too. He's going to be amazing. But I do wonder once he comes back, or if something happens to Stafford, or Sean McVay decides to retire and hop in a booth like has been rumored on multiple occasions, what happens then? Because I haven't seen every snap, so I'd like to spend some time going back and looking at it. But he strikes me as the kind of guy where he's a good player, but he's taking advantage of a really good offense. Remember a couple of years ago, Justin Jefferson talking about Kevin O'Connell, who was the offensive coordinator for the Rams, saying, man, this is how Cooper Kupp got open so often. This offense is amazing for scheming guys open. And it makes you even wonder then going back to Robert Woods. Robert Woods was not good in Buffalo. And then all of a sudden, he's like a really good wide receiver. Is it because he was actually a really good wide receiver? Or was he just a solid player that got schemed open a lot? And I think that's something that this offense can do is it can scheme receivers open. Right now, he's their top receiver. And so they're going to do everything they can in that offense to try to scheme him open. So for me, Nakua is a sell high. But if you're in a rebuild or you're a middle of the road team, I would rather just keep the youth. So it kind of depends where you're at. All right. Let me keep going. Sedated Fork said next time Tom needs a PowerPoint. It's not a terrible idea, actually. All right. Banzera says, T. Higgins price check. My team is in a rebuilding mode. I have Chase, Dotson, JSN, London, and Judy. 324 firsts, 225 first. So you're in a great spot for rebuilding because you have a lot of good young receivers and you have a lot of draft picks. So, you're in a great spot. I'm not sure if you're trying to get T. Higgins or you're trying to move on from him. But right now, price-wise, you're probably having to give right around 2 late firsts, if I had to guess. If I am in a rebuild, I do not want to pay those first-round picks to get T. Higgins, especially since I already have guys that are starting caliber. Now, if you were trading away T. Higgins to get 2 firsts, I might be willing to do that, especially if it's in a super flex, and that would help get me towards the top of the draft. with all of these first round picks you have to help shore up my quarterback position. Sorry, went brain fart. Shore up my quarterback position. Then yeah, I would do that. But I think it's probably right around 2 first. I would say late first. All right. Office Depot says, can't wait for Kyler to return. So many shares on IR and Superflex. Ready to flip him for starting wide receivers. Totally get that. Michael Anthony said, traded Puka for Saquon Barkley. Love it, but I've got that fear of missing out. I understand that. It's always tough trading away the current hotness for, what could or should be more steady assets. Always a scary thing to do, but more often than not, the flashes in the pan are just that. Every once in a while, that sizzle stays, but more often than not, that's typically what it tends to be. So let's take another quick break. We'll do another 10, 15 minutes, and then we'll get to Mr. Dennis Bennett, culture coach himself, here on the Better Sports Network. Maybe not. Maybe we won't go to break.
Jake Ferguson, I think, is going to be one of the biggest frauds in fantasy, to be honest. I'm trading Jake Ferguson in Dynasty for anything right now. I'm trading him in redraft if somebody will take him. He scored the touchdown on a 1-yard play this week, but this guy, last week, he played 75% of the snaps, only ran 50% of the routes. This week, we were hoping that would change. He only ran 21 of 43. Not even half again. So we were hoping he would improve from 50, worse than 50. So Jake Ferguson, not the guy we want. And you saw it. I mean, if you watch the game, they weren't locked in on anybody. They had Hayden Hendershot out there, got a goal line carry. Luke Schoonmaker, the rookie, scored a touchdown. Like, they are not committed to just one tight end. And if you have CeeDee Lamb and Michael Gallup and Brandon Cooks and Tony Pollard, if the tight end isn't playing every single snap, then he's not relevant. I mean, even if the one guy was playing every snap, you're not going to get a Dalton Schultz because there was no Brandon Cooks last year, and Michael Gallup was coming off an ACL. So the conditions changed, and now this guy's playing a partial snap share. Sell Jake Ferguson now. And people tell me, oh, Dak Prescott loves throwing to the tight end. That's not even true. There was a guy on Reddit that just posted a study. His name is, like, I Call Cats or something like that. Great study, though, that showed that Dak Prescott doesn't target the tight end on an above average level. I mean, CeeDee Lamb got 156 targets last year. 156. And Michael Gallup and Noah Brown combined for 150. So, and the running backs combined for 85. So what is it? Does he love the tight end, but he also loves CeeDee Lamb, and he also loves the other wide receivers, and he also loves the running backs? Or just Kellen Moore just throw the ball a ton? That's what it was, right? So it's like this whole he loves the tight end situation, that's not even true, right? Or he just loves everybody. Maybe he does love the tight end, but clearly he loves CeeDee Lamb. No, like clearly he loves the running backs. So just don't worry about it. Forget about it. Trade Jake Ferguson for whatever you can get right now.
All right, we're back. To a few more questions here. Maybe if we have some time, I got a couple other little nuggets. I always plan a couple little extra nuggets, right? Just in case, there's some lulls. I always want to have extra things to talk about. So I got a couple extra little things that we could touch on, could talk about if we have the time to do so. But if not, I would love to answer any and all trade, start sits, any of that kind of stuff that you guys have for me this week. All right. Just Josh says, T-Law or Lamar long term? This is a really interesting question because both players we've seen their peak be a little bit higher as far as their value goes. So I think both guys their value's a little lower than we might have seen at other points in their careers. Trevor Lawrence, it would have been off season, was probably as high after the playoffs and all that, but he started the season pretty slow. The Calvin Ridley thing hasn't really boosted his numbers like we would have hoped. Lamar Jackson, he is coming off a big week, but he's had some other games where it's been and so many injured seasons in a row to end the year that we've seen his price drop a little bit. So these are guys that we're looking at as quarterback 7, 8, 9 range in most super flex leagues, maybe as high as 6, but somewhere in that 6 to 9 range in your super flex leagues. I'm going to go with T-Law. Reason being, one, he's younger. It's not a drastic amount, but you got an extra 3 or 4 years with Lawrence. So I would rather have the years. Give me the extra years. Then on top of that, you add in, he doesn't have the injury history that Lamar has. So between those two things, I think that's what puts it over the top. Are there going to be higher ceiling games for Lamar? Sure. And even maybe season long has a higher ceiling, but career-wise in Dynasty, give me the safer asset, and I think the safer asset is probably Trevor Lawrence. Q's, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, 43 says Christian Watson price check. Yeah, he's one that we haven't seen much this year. He's only played one game with the one against Detroit in prime time. Made the one big catch, but other than that was pretty quiet the entire game. Right now, he is down a little bit in value, and I was touching on Romeo Doubs earlier in the show with how good he's been, and there's a question that he could potentially be now Watson's the 2 and maybe Doubs is the 1. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out, and it would make sense. Christian Watson spent a lot of time with the first team. Doubs not as much, but that would have meant he was spending a lot more time with a guy like Jordan Love last season. So they probably had time to build a rapport a little bit more so than Christian Watson. All of that being said, I think I can't imagine you would be able to acquire Christian Watson for any less than a first. I think at this point, whoever had him remembers the good run last year. He's still a young player and has the shot to be the number one weapon in this offense, at least from the wide receiver position anyway. So I would have to imagine it's probably right around that first. And I struggle with whether I would buy for that price because there's part of me that does worry. Was it just a few games? How's he going to look with Love? All that kind of stuff. Is Doubs showing out? But then part of me remembers, man, that ceiling is pretty tantalizing. So I think a first, mid to late first there is probably the right range for him. Sedated Fork says, I have a team that we drafted 24 picks. I am clearly going to be struggling to compete this year. Which of these running backs are you trading away? Achane, Gibbs, Pacheco, Brian Robinson, Mostert. In a rebuild, I'm willing to trade any running back, even Gibbs and Achane, even though they've looked amazing. In a rebuild, I have no problem getting rid of any of them. But I think Pacheco, Brian Robinson, and Mostert are must-sells for a rebuilding team. Pacheco, we don't know how long he's going to have as the guy. Same with Brian Robinson. So even though they're younger in their careers, or only in their second NFL seasons, they're not the profile of a guy that you would expect to be a 6, 7, 8 year guy. They're the hashtag 2 to 3 year windows, as Rich likes to talk about. So I would not hesitate for a second to trade them. And Mostert's 31 years old. So he is not going to be helping you in a year or two when you're ready to really compete once again. So I would for sure be moving on from the other three, but put out feelers for Gibbs and Achane. Somebody might blow you away. And if you get an offer that you just can't refuse, I would much rather build up my quarterbacks, my wide receivers, and my tight ends, and then figure out my running backs last. I'm not saying you need to give them away. They need to pay market value and then some probably. But if somebody's willing to give you what that costs, I'm willing to move on from those two players. Office Depot says drafting a lot of Trevor Lawrence at the quarterback 6 this preseason over Lamar and Fields. Tanner said he asked a question earlier, but to have to ask one more. Absolutely. That's totally fine. What about Nico for London on a rebuild team? Ooh. This is one of those where even saying it feels wrong. Like, oh yeah, I should trade Nico for London. Like, no, that feels wrong. But when you really break it down, they're both young. One's 23, one's 24. So they're both young wide receivers. Wow. It feels like I should not be struggling with this, but I'm really struggling with this. For what it's worth, Heavy T, and he's an Atlanta Falcons fan, and he's saying keep Nico. And I gotta be honest, I'm kind of, could I really take him ahead of London? Because I do think London's the slightly better player. So I feel like this could be a little short-sighted. But I would see if I could get Nico plus. If I can get Nico plus, I'm definitely doing it. Straight up. Man, it feels so wrong, but yeah, I think I might pick Nico. It feels so wrong, but yeah, I think I'm going to. He said, or Jamison Williams and for Dobbs and Dobbins in a rebuild. I don't want to trade for Dobbins in a rebuild. I can't trust it. Just Josh says Nico Collins or Puka long term. Both seem to be having breakout years. I know who I'd go with, but I think I'm curious as to what you would think. I did talk about how I think he as in Puka is a little bit of a sell high. He is having a fantastic season though. And I don't see it for sure going away. It's just there's a lot of question marks with Kupp and with the quarterback and with McVay potentially retiring and all that kind of stuff. But if I had to pick one, I'm in on Nico. I'm in on Nico. I think Nico is legit. I think it's a legit quarterback in an offense that's ascending. He was a former, I believe, let me double check as I say it, but I believe if I remember correctly, Nico was a former 5-star receiver coming out of high school, but Michigan has not done a great job developing their wide receivers overall. So let me see. Was he actually? No, he was a 4-star, but he was a very high 4-star overall. So he was not quite a 5, but yeah, I think I'm gonna go Nico. Let's see. Alfazibo said, "Are we starting week 5? Watson or Dobbs?" Ooh, I think I'm starting Dobbs. I am. Watson's come back slow. He was on a pitch count. I think I would start Dobbs. I think he's got the targets right now. So give me Dobbs if I'm having to choose between those two guys in my starting lineup. All right. Last one, and then we'll take a quick break before Dennis Bennett joins us. What are your thoughts on guys like Pickens, Hollywood, Burks, etc.? I'm a real builder, and these guys are all at a great price in my league. Would you be comfortable floating out a late first for any one of them? I would for Hollywood. I'm not a huge Pickens guy, but I'd get it. Burks, I'm not sold on Burks. I'm not sure on Burks, but yeah, I would do it for Hollywood and Pickens. I would for Hollywood and Pickens. Tanner said, not sure if you answered, but would you take JMO over Dobbs in a rebuild? Love the upside. I would. I'm probably going to be a little more risk averse. No, I'm taking JMO. With a later, guys that we're talking about as like wide receiver 3 types, give me the upside. So I'll take JMO. And if I fail, I fail. But I think I'd rather take the upside. So let's take a quick break. We'll get Dennis Bennett on here talking about looking at these players, their forecast moving forward, some interesting names, some stock watches on some players. Excited to get into it with Dennis. We'll be back in a moment.
the Bears have to be one of the most inept franchises of any sport I've ever seen in my entire life. And they share the city with the White Sox, who are also inept. Like, that is how bad the Bears are. I just don't understand how you can go your entire existence and the quarterback that wins you a Super Bowl is Jim McMahon. You couldn't find anybody else.
They don't have a good history with quarterbacks, and they let him be the quarterback for a long time too.
Deshaun Watson and Patrick Mahomes right there. And you drafted Mitch Trubisky. They were right there. I there's a lot of pain in being a Falcons fan. The Bears are one of the teams I could argue they might have it worse, and they have a Super Bowl.
And
when the best quarterback in the past 50 years is Jay Cutler, you have a problem.
That's so funny that you just said that. We were talking about Jay Cutler the other day, me and my friend, and I was like, yeah, he was on, because we were watching the Colorado Rockies game against the Giants, and it looked like he was behind the thing. I was, yeah, well, he played for Denver most of his career. We looked it up. Chicago let him be their starting quarterback way too long.
Here's the thing too, is that Jay Cutler wasn't bad. Like, he was erratic. He wasn't terrible, though.
The poor man's Brett Favre.
I'm taking him over Justin Fields. I'm sorry.
I would.
But
yeah.
Jay Cutler led that team to an NFC title game.
Yeah.
That they lost to Green Bay. But he's gotten farther than anybody else. You want to know who the other starting quarterback was for the Bears in the other Super Bowl appearance they made? It was Rex Grossman. What are we doing out here? It was Rex Grossman and Kyle Orton was the backup. How are you that bad? Bro, like, oh my God. Listen to the top 5. According to Football Reference, the top 5 greatest Bears quarterbacks of all time. Jay Cutler, number 1.
I can't believe it.
Sid Luckman, who last played in 1950, is number 2. Jim Harbaugh is number 3. Jim McMahon, the Super Bowl winner, is number 4, and he played there for 6 years. And Mitch Trubisky, is number 5 on the list as terms of passing yards go.
Oh, we're back. Friendly reminder, Fantasy Alarm, All-Pro subscription, 7-day free trial of the All-Pro subscription. Go to fantasyalarm.com. That is fantasyalarm.com. The great Dennis Bennett at Culture Coach on X is here. Dennis, how you doing, buddy?
Doing great, man. I appreciate the heavy metal bump music, man. That's my jam.
Yeah, you are a rocker through and through.
So it's, we was talking with my son today. They're writing their first EP. They've got about 5 songs, and they're like, we don't like these last 2. We're gonna write new ones. I'm like, that's fine, but you got to get to work, son. You got school. You got songs to write.
Dennis, if you had to pick one band and you were only allowed to listen to their music catalog for the rest of your life, who are you choosing?
One band. So I'm going to look for a band with a huge catalog and a wide variety of music because, while I love metal, I also like to have some versatility to it. Okay. So I would probably go with the Rolling Stones.
Okay.
Because while they don't get as heavy as I like, they've got some heavier stuff, but there's some times when I just want to like mellow out or go out to the country. So they've got country, they've got disco, they've got funk, they've got rock, they've got a wide variety of just, their catalog is enormous.
Yeah.
So for me, it would probably be the Stones. Now, if I'm sticking to a band that's like narrower, kind of more in just like a genre, I'm probably still looking for a band with a nice catalog. Probably going with Kiss because I love Kiss.
Okay.
And they've got, they've got some disco in their stuff. They've got some ballads, lots of metal. I'm a longtime Kiss. Gene Simmons is why I became a bass player.
Yeah, there you go. I like it. Sedated Fork says, give me that vinyl album that you want the most.
The vinyl album that I want the most is 44 Caliber Horticulture by Guns N' Roses. It was a Japanese album when they were first coming onto the scene, and I used to have it. I found it in a used record store here in Columbus. I was in my 20s. I was playing in bands and I was collecting records, and I had it. And then, my records all got sold or whatnot. But, that would probably be it, because that has sentimentality for me.
Yeah, that's pretty sweet. Edward or Edith wants you to dress up as Kiss for Halloween. Think you could do that?
I could probably pull Gene Simmons off. He's getting a little chunkier in his old age.
You got the long tongue for it?
Not really. Not Gene Simmons long. That's for sure. I got the forehead for it. I can paint the little V here.
There you go.
I don't have the man bun. I definitely have to wig up. Put those boots on, get myself up there. Gene's already. He's like 6 foot, 6'1", 6'6", 6'7" with the boots. I'm shrinking, so I'd be like 6'2" with the boots.
Hey, still works. Mr. OG Hippo says, what do you think I get for CJ Stroud? He offered 2 seconds. If this is a super flex league, that is not even close to enough. If it's a 1 QB league, that's fine. So it depends if it's a 1 QB or not. But if it's a super flex, at minimum, you're starting with like an early first and a late first. Like you need 2 firsts, one of them being early at minimum. Don't you think, Dennis?
Yeah, in a 1 QB, 2 seconds might even be an overpay in a 1 QB. But Stroud's playing amazing. The underlying numbers are kind of average, but the high level numbers, the yards, the opportunities, he needs to get in the end zone more. If he starts, clicking with the touchdowns, because he's not turning the ball over. And for as bad as their offensive line is, or as depleted as it is, he started the game or the season getting a lot of sacks. The last couple of games, it came down. He's not giving up as many sacks. So,
all right, Dennis. Well, let's get into what you put together for us today. And you put together some things about some trends that we're seeing with certain players. You've also got some stuff on like the stock watch. What do you want to get to? What do you want to cover? Because there's a lot of good information here, a lot of interesting thoughts on some of these players. So I'm going to kind of let you lead this if you're all right with that. You lead the way, and I'll interject.
So when I was thinking about trend spotting, it's like we're 4 weeks into the season. And we play Dynasty, so we're looking at trends in season because, we want to win or we want to make the right decisions in a rebuild. So we're looking for this season and beyond. And so the first name I put in there was Russell Wilson. So he's sitting at QB 9 right now, QB 10 and points per game. Russell is notorious as a slow starter. So if you remember last year, what did we were saying through week 4, 5, 6, Russ is a slow starter, don't worry, he'll come around. It's and he didn't. It was until they fired Hackett, he didn't come around.
Right.
So I'm looking at this year and he's at QB 9. We're at week 4. That feels like he could, if we look at his history, this is where he starts to kick it up. He's in his second year, first year with Peyton, but second year with Judy, second year with Sutton. He's been around these guys. Javante's, he's back now. So there's a lot of chemistry coming. So are we looking at the trend? Well, Russell's 34, 35. Are we at that trend where he's back to slower start and he's going to end up being QB 5, QB 6, QB 4 on the season? Or is this his high water mark, do you think?
No, I'm on board with you. I've been buying Russell Wilson, even though he didn't look good. One, because he was cheap, but two, his contract is in such a way that he is going nowhere. Like, he's their starting quarterback for the foreseeable future, no matter what. So just on those two things alone, I was buying. But then we see the production, and that defense is bad, like really bad. And when a defense is playing that poorly, that's great news for fantasy football, because that means your quarterback is going to be behind often, and he is going to have to throw the ball a bunch to be able to stay in games. So I think that this continues. I think that they're going to have to throw the ball quite a bit. I think he's going to be a very good asset at quarterback for your fantasy football teams. And I'm in on this. Like, I would be at this point. I still think you can buy low, because I'm not sure how many people are really buying it. So I would be in to buy low on Russell Wilson right now.
Are you in for just this year, or are you in for 2 or 3?
I'm in for 2. I'm in for the length of his guaranteed money. After that, who knows what's going to happen. But as far as it's still, 30, 40 million dead cap hit. Yeah, I'm in.
Yeah, he ain't going nowhere.
Yep.
So I'm with you on Russell. The next one was Justin Fields. So he's QB 12, QB 15 in points per game. Horrendous start to the season, just like last year.
Yep.
And there are 2 schools of thought. School 1, Justin Fields is a terrible quarterback and he shouldn't be playing in the NFL. He's nobody. He's a third stringer, yada, yada. School number 2, the coaching situation hasn't been great. They haven't been playing to his strengths. They need to let him run more. They need to, give him stuff that he's comfortable with. Well, last year, what we saw is he struggled, and then they changed the offense a bit, and he ran a lot. This year, he was struggling, but they've changed the offense, but he's not running. He only ran the ball 4 times last week, but he threw 4 touchdown passes, his first time over 300 yards. He wants to be the first Bears quarterback to throw for 4,000 yards. And he's saying, it's not too late. We can do this. So is he trending up? Did they have a come to Jesus talk after Fields called him out in the press and said, man, you're not putting me in good situations to make plays? And coincidentally, they took Chase Claypool out of the mix, and the offense, I don't know if explodes is the right word, but they were certainly more productive.
Absolutely. Dennis, did you get to watch him play much
last week?
Yeah, against the Chiefs.
I watched
the Chiefs, the Broncos.
Yeah, I did watch some of it. It seems like he's making okay decisions, but he still had the fumble was terrible. You can't
the fumble at the end of the game was bad, yeah. But the thing that I came away from that game was the confidence looked a lot different than it did the first couple weeks. He looked like he felt so much more confident, and he was making throws. Yes, some of them were wide open, just blown coverage, but some of those were in windows. And it didn't feel like he was hesitating like he was before, where he was a half second late all the time. It felt like he was anticipating, which is what he was not doing the first 3 weeks. So as somebody that's been team Justin Fields, it didn't take much for me to be like, yeah, I'm back, baby. Yeah. But that definitely helped.
Yeah. Some of those throws, when Baker came on the scene, what we saw that first year was he's making the throws Tyrod won't. He's putting it where he expects the player to be in a tight window. And some of those throws for Fields this week were exactly that. I trust my guy is going to be there. And maybe some of that new confidence was, I've already lost Chase Claypool. I know he's running a route, but I don't know if he's going to be where I think he's going to be. So that's one person already out of my mix here. And now I got to, make some chicken out of chicken feathers. chicken salad out of chicken feathers. But yeah, I thought Fields, I got to see him put it together for a couple more weeks, but
Sure.
I'm certainly not panic selling.
No, absolutely not. And like we said, the Broncos defense is bad. So you have to take that into account. But some of them were anticipation throws in tight windows. That doesn't matter what defense it is. If you can make those throws in those tight windows, that's a good sign.
Yeah. So the last quarterback I had on here is, in startups, we were looking at Trevor Lawrence. He's QB6, QB7. The end of that second tier, everybody's All-American. Urban Meyer's gone. They got Calvin Ridley. It's wheels up. Well, he's sitting at QB 19, QB 22 in points per game. And now we're kind of all asking ourselves, and I look at my best ball teams and I'm like, all right, where did I go wrong with Trevor Lawrence? Is it that he's, and we see these quarterbacks come into the league, first round quarterbacks, we see them fail often. So if he does, it isn't like, oh, we've never seen this before, but and I guess he's not failing. He's just not achieving the heights that we thought he would.
Right.
Is this who he is though? Is he, a mid QB2, low end QB2? Is he going to be able to deliver what we as fantasy managers had hoped?
It is interesting, and I've always been a little lower than consensus on Trevor Lawrence. I remember, now granted, this hasn't looked great recently, but I remember talking about Fields and Trevor Lawrence. I have them in the same tier. This was them coming out. I don't think that Lawrence is head and shoulders above Justin Fields. He's not this running quarterback, although he can run, but he's not a running quarterback by any stretch of the imagination. And they did get him more weapons this year, and it hasn't seemed to make a big difference so far. And even last year, I know he improved, but he still wasn't a great fantasy quarterback last year. It was towards the end of the year that things kind of heated up and he looked decent in the playoff game and, that kind of stuff. But so far in his career, he's just been okay for fantasy. He hasn't been great. I think he's better than quarterback 19, but is he quarterback 7 like we've been drafting him at? I'm not sure that's the case either. I think, maybe he's more in the Kirk Cousins range, the kind of guy that's going to be somewhere between quarterback 9 and 13, 14 most years. I think I would feel more comfortable saying something like that.
Yeah, because I think a lot of us looked at Trevor Lawrence, and the easy comparison for us was Justin Herbert. They're both 6'6". They're both mobile, can run, maybe don't run as much as they can, but they can run, big arms. But Lawrence just doesn't put the numbers up like Herbert does. And, now we're sitting here, we're 3 years in, and it's easy to write off year number 1 with Urban Meyer, but, we're 3 years in. All right, let's talk about some running backs.
All right.
So this one, it's 2 players we're going to talk about because they're on the same team.
Real quick, I know they asked some questions. We'll have to see if we get some time to get to the questions. But Dan Edwards acknowledged that my boy Cole Kmet was awesome this week, and I just have to bask in that for a moment because it feels good. Thank you, Dan. Appreciate that. All right, continue, Dennis.
No worries. So we got Jaylen Warren and Najee Harris, and the fantasy torches are calling for Najee Harris's head on a pitchfork. They want Jaylen Warren in there. Now, Warren, athletically, isn't as great as it may seem. He's kind of a middling guy athletically. He's not overly big. He's I think 5'10", 210, somewhere in that range. So he's not small. But Najee kind of profiles a little better athletically. Now, Najee doesn't have the explosion that Warren does.
Right.
And Najee, though, is having a decent year on the ground. He's averaging over, I think, 4.3 yards per carry, I think. But he's getting 70% of the carries. But Warren is making hay in the passing game. Do we want a platoon? Are we just stuck with a platoon? Because do we think Warren can handle the full load? Najee's a volume guy, and we like to bang on guys and use that as a knock against them. But I'll be honest, I want all my running backs to get volume. So right now, we just got a volume guy who's not getting volume.
Yeah, and it's been tough. I think this would look a lot different had we seen another another end zone trip or two. But this offense has just been really bad. I think there were high hopes for year 2 of Kenny Pickett, and it just hasn't happened. Now, to give them a little bit of credit, they've faced a lot of tough defenses, Cleveland, San Francisco, just to name 2 of them. But we were hoping better things out of this offense than what we've been given so far. So that has definitely been a bit disappointing. But I do think the Warren thing's a little overhyped. I know everybody wants this to be the next Tony Pollard, Najee Harris. Warren is not the explosive guy that Tony Pollard is. He's not as good. And Najee Harris is not as old as Zeke was at that point when all of this started to take shape. They're pretty close in age. So look, am I underwhelmed by Najee? Sure. But am I screaming for Jaylen Warren? No.
I mean, Najee's he's got 12.2% of his runs are explosive runs, versus 4% for Jaylen Warren. It doesn't look like that on tape, but it's because Warren's happen in the passing game. He's taken a pass and that's what looks.
What's explosive runs qualified by? 10 yards or more, or what is it?
For 15 plus on fantasy points.
Okay.
Fantasy points data suite. I love that,
okay.
Man. So I just, the offense, if they would open the offense up a little more, and maybe Deontay Johnson's absence has something to do with this, and that might be what's held Kenny Pickett back a little bit. And, adding just one stud rookie offensive lineman maybe didn't boost the offensive line as much as we had hoped in the offseason.
Right.
But if not, Najee, I feel like he needs to get up there into the, 15, 18 carries a game. And, he caught 70 passes his rookie year, something like that, 60 passes his rookie season. He can catch the ball. Now that was with Roethlisberger dumping it off.
Sure.
But he can do that. My concern is that because of what Warren shows, that limits Najee's volume, and it hurts both of them for fantasy. I don't know. The trend seems troubling because you're never going to get quite what you wanted. We're looking at, RB2s, RB3s.
Yeah, well, and even this past week, you look at the numbers. Jaylen Warren 8 for 29 against the Texans, not great. Najee Harris was 14 for 71. He significantly better. Obviously more work as well, but then the one passing play that Najee got, 32 yards, like an explosive play. Jaylen Warren, 6 receptions, 26 yards. Now the volume was there in the receiving game, and that's what's kind of boosting him up a little bit. And that's what really hurts is Najee used to be that guy, and he's not anymore. But I think that's the thing that's hurting him the most. If you're just looking at raw numbers, you're happy when your running back's getting 71 yards in a game. Like, that's a solid game out of a running back.
Right.
But no touchdowns, only one reception. That's where things are different than they were before.
Yep. Well, let's hop on their questions real quick, and then we'll close out with some stock watch.
Let's do it. All right. Dan Edwards asks, 12-team Superflex, 1.5 tight end premium, PPR, start 10 guys. Your contender going for a 3-peat. Love that. And Burrow and Dobbs are your only QBs. Wide receivers are Chase, JJ, and Debo. JT's coming off the pup this week. Would you trade your 24 first for Baker? Currently sitting at 2-2 and 7th in the league. Not many better QBs on waivers. Thanks, guys. Woo.
So I wouldn't trade my 24 first, but I would
wouldn't.
trade my 25 first.
Would you?
I think so. I mean, because I can justify it to myself by pushing it out there another year. Baker's playing good enough right now. Now, the thing that scares me is Evans has picked up a hamstring.
Yep.
That makes me a little bit nervous. But Godwin came out and had a fantastic game after Evans went out. Trey Palmer's looking good. And that other Devin Tompkins is popping off. Cade Otton caught a touchdown.
Right.
So, it to me, they're rallying around Baker or around Mike Evans' quest for his 10th straight 1,000-yard season. There's something in Tampa that's rallying them beyond what I expected. And I think I can justify it to myself. First I'm going to look at and see if there's anybody else that's lower in the standings that's willing to maybe trade me a little better quarterback than Baker.
Yeah.
But who did he say his quarterbacks were? Burrow and Dobbs. This is the hard thing with Burrow is that I don't know how. I want to believe the calf is getting better, but my eyes tell me it's going to be like this all year.
Yeah.
So I'm sending offers to buy Burrow on rebuilds.
Yeah, I do worry about that too. I feel like they've got to either sit him and let him rest so he can get fully healthy, or you're going to see this all year. I'm kind of with you. I don't think it's something that's just going to easily go away. I don't hate giving my 25 first. It just feels wrong giving a first for Baker.
It does.
But he has played well.
I like I said, I'd try to make a deal for somebody that's a little bit better and put out some feelers there and see. But when push comes to shove, you're going to need somebody for the bye week. Burrow's playing like crap.
Yeah.
I mean, I think he's QB 23 or 27 or 31, something like that.
Yeah.
He just can't throw the ball. He can't push off on that calf. He can't move around. I can only imagine the tension in the locker room when Jamar Chase walks back past his locker and says, MFer, I told you to sit out the first 4 games.
Yep, he did. He did tell him that. It's true. It's 100% true. Chris says my dynasty team is 0-4. QB is Burrow and Tua. Running backs Breece Hall, Najee Harris. Wide receivers Chase, AJ Brown, Ridley, and Puka. Tight end is Hawkinson. Would you sell or hold? Thanks. Overall, that's not a bad team. It's a solid team where just a lot of those guys have had, coming off injury or dealing with injuries. Just haven't quite lived up to expectations this year, but overall, it's not a bad team. Overall, starting out 0-4, even if you have a really good rest of the year, it's really tough to come back from that big of a hole. It's possible. I've seen it done, but it's really tough to come back and make the playoffs off that big of a hole. That said, I'm not just completely obliterating my team and selling everything. I think you have a good core there. Maybe I would look to sell a Najee or somebody like that. But overall, I'm just going to kind of let this thing ride, get myself a good draft pick for 24 to add to this core and run it back next year.
Yeah, if you have your own draft pick with this core, all right, so your team is 0-4. That now I'm in the – so I have a situation where I had a fairly decent team in a league, and I need to rebuild. And I texted you about the Dalton Kincaid trade the other day.
Yeah.
Because that was part of a deal for me to sell Justin Jefferson.
Oh, wow.
And I didn't want to sell Jefferson. I immediately regretted the trade as soon as I did it. I have Chris Olave. I've got Devonta Smith. But the draft order is set based on potential points. So you've got to get point scorers off your team.
Right.
No, I didn't trade. Now, just to be clear, I didn't trade Jefferson straight up for Kincaid. That's not what I did. So, but still, I probably could have gotten more, but it had been an hour of going back and forth. And I was like, I think I sent Monty and I sent Monty Jefferson and a couple older starters, and I got back Kincaid at first, Quentin Johnston, and another young player that I liked. But I'm not going to get the first pick with where my team sat anyways. The hard part was that the trade happened after the Detroit game started, so I actually had to take the 35 points from David Montgomery.
Ooh, that hurts.
Yeah. All right, let's look at some stock watch here real quick. Zach Wilson is the guy I want to talk about. Started off a little bit rough. We know I don't feel like he's the guy.
No.
I feel like he's, it's like you were young once, you were dating, there's a difference between Mr. Right and Mr. Right now. So, Zach Wilson is Mr. Right now. What does he have to do to stay relevant? Like, is he playing to make himself a valuable trade asset for next year? Last week he had a 72% completion rate, which was up a lot from where he was the first couple games.
Right.
6.28 yards per attempt. Excuse me.
Bless you. No, you're good. Happens.
And that's up from 5.8 yards per attempt. Well, not great. It's more middle of the road, but it is an improvement.
Right.
Can he turn himself into a viable candidate for some other team this year, or are we just going to see a meltdown coming?
I think it's definitely in the realm of possibility for him to become. I don't know that we'll ever see him be to fulfill what the hopes were when he was the number 2 overall pick. I think those days are pretty well gone. But could he potentially go the Geno Smith route, sit for a while, get the opportunity later on, and make something of it after he's matured a little bit, he's seen some ball, things like that? You see he has some traits. There's a lot of traits that are missing, but he does have some traits that could make him a viable quarterback in the NFL. So I do think that he's at a point where if he can do enough, he could sign on as a bridge quarterback for somebody, or maybe the backup behind another really good quarterback. He can sit for a while, develop, and then maybe in another 3 or 4 years we see him again, and all of a sudden now he's actually an asset as opposed to just, winging it all over the place, turning the ball over, looking like the moment's too big for him.
Because, this week what I saw was, he got pressured, but when he scrambled, he didn't look frantic. Like before this year, he looked frantic when he got pressure in the pocket. And this time I saw him scramble out, turn the right way, make decent throws. Not all of them were complete, but he made good decisions. And, I don't know if it's just something that is clicking. He's got one more year on his contract after this. I don't know if they would want to, if they're going to want to trade him. If Rodgers comes back and plays this year, like, him and his witch doctor think he can, then maybe they can move him for, a second round pick or a third round pick because there's never enough quarterbacks. But
Sure.
I feel like his stock is rising right now based on what he's doing, because I think by and large he had been written off especially by the fantasy community.
But he didn't right back?
No, he hasn't yet. And I think he's moving into that, could he become a Kirk Cousins? Maybe that's a little high, maybe more like Derek Carr. That might be a little more along the range. So I think his stock is ticking. Yeah, I think his stock is ticking up a little bit, but I don't know how high it is. Speaking of Kirk Cousins, I had him on the list here. He's currently
let's talk about him.
He's currently QB7, QB9 in points per game. He's in the last year of his contract. He's not likely to be back with Minnesota. He'll be 36 years old going into next year. So we've seen it a couple, Russell Wilson changed teams, struggled his first year. I had somebody else that I'd looked up Derek Carr changing teams, not being great now. He's injured, but still, I feel like Kirk is kind of somewhere between those two guys. And
well, we did see Stafford do it, and it worked well, and Brady did it, and it went well.
I think Stafford is closer to Cousins than Brady is.
Sure.
I don't know that Stafford. I think Stafford and Russ are probably fairly close.
Sure.
So it'll depend on where he goes, but I feel like Cousins is a buy now for a championship run. He's on a team with a bad defense that he's usually going to have to be throwing the ball. Last week he only threw it 19 times, but it's setting up for him to make a run for a new contract, which sets up great for us to make a run for a fantasy championship.
I want, and Tyler and I have talked about this, I want Atlanta to trade for Kirk Cousins so bad. I do. I think you put Kirk Cousins in that offense instead of Desmond Ridder, all of a sudden they're the best team in their division, without a doubt. Yeah. And there's enough pieces on that Atlanta Falcons team where over the next 2 or 3 years, with a competent quarterback like Kirk Cousins, I mean, do I think they win the Super Bowl? I don't know about that. That's a little lofty. But are they at least in the conversation? Yeah, they're at least in the conversation with the Kirk Cousins.
They could win a playoff game.
Absolutely. When you have Drake London and Kyle Pitts, you have an offensive line that was supposed to be good. It hasn't been quite as good as I think people were hoping it would be this year, but there's still time for them to turn that around. You've got arguably the best running back in the game, at least the best young running back in the game. I think Christian McCaffrey still has that best running back in the game on lock for a little bit, but at least the best young running back in the game. And that defense has looked pretty solid. They've done quite a few good things. Jesse Bates is balling out in the secondary for them. So it's a good team. You put Kirk Cousins on that team, it would be interesting.
So what are you paying for Cousins and a super flex contender?
If I'm a contender, I'm willing to pay the first. I'm willing to pay the second. I don't know if I can pay much more than a first and second just because of his age.
So let's say you have 2 firsts and one of them is projected to be somewhere between 4 and 7. Are you willing to give that first, or you want to keep your own, make sure you trade away your own as a contender? Or would you give that higher first?
Do I only have to give the first?
Well, the first and the second. So, you offer the projected 112 and, 212, and they come back and say, well, no, I want the 17 and 212.
I think I'd rather take Stafford, trade for Stafford, and just give my late first.
Yeah, it's I think it depends on, like, this week it's easy to do that. Cousin comes off of one of those 50 pass games where he's throwing for 350 and 3. It's a little harder. All right, last one here. I want to talk about Kyren Williams.
Oof.
Everybody's darling. People love Kyren Williams right now.
He's played great. He's gotten a lot of opportunity.
And he's getting fed. He's also 5'10" and 203 pounds or something like that. 5'9", 203 pounds. And that terrifies me. Like, it's great that he's getting the passing work, but they're giving him like 20 carries too.
Yeah.
Like, when do his stock is high. When do you get out on him? How long do you ride it? Because like, I've got a couple shares and I'm like, man, I like having good players on my team, but this is a guy that I'm just terrified that's going to break down because he just can't handle the workload.
Yeah, he's definitely somebody that I'm looking to potentially move. I liked his tape, though. I remember liking his tape. I gave him a fairly decent nerd score. I think he was 6th in the class, which based on his draft capital, he was like the 10th running back drafted in the class. So I was definitely in on him, and he was really just speed away from being one of the top 3 running backs in the class. It was literally just his top end speed just wasn't there. But he's doing good things in short areas. But I understand your concern. And anytime there's a running back that has day 3 or worse draft capital, which would only also be undrafted, but it's not top 2 days, there's always a huge risk of them getting replaced at any moment. So if I'm a true contender, that's where it gets tricky. But if I'm anything other than a true contender, I'm selling all day. But on a true contender, there's only so many running backs that are healthy.
Right.
And it's really tough to just give up a Kyron Williams on a contending team.
Yeah, I watch the numbers roll in, and I'm like, man, that's nice. And I'm like, boy, man, I got bad vibe on this. Bad vibe.
Yeah, he is a tricky one. But that whole team is performing much better than expected.
Yeah.
The division's not as tough this year overall. It's San Francisco, and then it's everybody else. But man, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do with him. It's tricky, but definitely selling if I'm not a contender. That's for sure.
So we're running out of time. So let's get these last couple questions in the box here. So Oga's 43. Bryce Young Dynasty outlook. He's his QB2 in Superflex. Thinking about trading him to get one of the QBs next year.
Yep. I'm not a Bryce Young guy at all. I think he's shown us for a couple weeks he's not. It's too early to know for sure, but I'm selling.
But he looks like a dollar store Derek Carr.
He does. Absolutely.
Boy, let's see. Dan said a contender bought Cousins for a 24-second. That's nice.
Just 1 second?
Yeah, I know.
Nuts. Well,
dealing.
For sure. Well, Dennis, this has been fun, man. Appreciate you putting all this work into the stock watch and trend spotting and all that kind of stuff. Remind all the good folks where they can find you and anything you're working on.
So I am at culture_coach on the X machine. I almost call it the Xbox every single time.
Do it. It's called the
so
Xbox.
I'm a culture_coach there. Dynasty Nerds in the back room, editing articles, pumping those out. We're getting ready to start our first 2024 rookie mock. Should be out by the end of the month. We'll do them monthly for the next couple months as the season goes on, publish those articles. And look out for Stephen Pintado's the Script to Fantasy Success article.
Yep. No, he does a great job. You can find me out there on the Xbox. I kind of like that at Dynasty Price, answering questions, trades, all that kind of stuff. Also got I got too much to talk about. Come back next week at Dynasty Price here on the Better Sports Network. We'll see you then.